Coming up today on Locked On Texas Tech, sound from the collegial Brett Yormark, who also says the Big 12 is done expanding right now. Also talking Whodini and what time the freaks come out. Next on Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're going to start this thing off right. Everything runs through Lubbock.
Great to be with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network. Always appreciate being your first listen on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. Make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. He's the only Chris Level. I'm Casey Cowan. And Chris, great to be back with you once again today, my man. And we have got a boatload to dive into. We will get into Red Raider football conversation coming up later on in the program. We got to get to a list of freaks, not only for Texas Tech getting a few mentions, but also some guys that we're going to see right out of the gates on opposing sidelines make this freak squad we'll get to before the day is done. But we've also got some Big 12 conversation to have here today, Chris. If you have not seen it, Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark making an appearance on the Marshawn and Uran Sports Media podcast, and there is a boatload of conversation to digest there. We'll just bring you a couple of things that caught our attention. But, Chris, there's no question that Brett Yormark does things a little bit differently. He's got his own style, and I think in some ways that is shaken up in a good way, the way that some things are done in not only the Big 12 conference, but in other conferences. And that was one of the things to kick off our conversation that Brett Yormark spoke on the Marshawn and Uran podcast. Here is Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark.
But I have learned here during expansion, and I still do have a little bit of a knot in my stomach. I never want my gain to be someone else's loss. That's a little different here. And on the heels of not Colorado, but of all four corner schools coming, I texted George, reached out to him. Obviously, he was busy. He and I spoke last week. And effectively, I said, hey, I'm sorry it came down to this. And I'm sorry I put you in a tough position, but this was something that, we had to do. And, this was something that the board and our key stakeholders encouraged. And I'm sorry that my gain is your loss. And we had a very collegial conversation. George was fantastic. And I'll be seeing him again in a couple of weeks at some industry meetings. I'm not one to hide. And again, I've been very intentional about expansion. And I did that in an effort to make sure that I didn't do, expansion didn't happen in someone's shadow. It didn't happen at night. It wasn't a shock and awe moment. Everyone knew the Big 12 had an appetite to expand. And I maybe some people in the industry didn't like that I was so intentional about it, but I'm very transparent. In fact, I telegraphed it. And I just felt that was the right way to do it versus other things that I witnessed and observed in our industry over time where transparency really wasn't really what happened. I felt I had to do it a little differently, and that's really about my personality and how I do things, generally speaking.
Yeah, it's as if he's giving the spoiler alerts to a movie that nobody's seen yet at times, because he did this. Now he's known things, and so he can kind of give a spoiler alert at times. But speaking of his transparency, and I go back to the TV deal that he kind of hinted at back in, I guess it was, October or November when they were doing the Big 12 basketball event. And it was like, and he kind of was hinting at, I envision that we will have a TV done, a TV deal done within a few weeks or whatever. And sure enough, and it sounded like they already had a handshake deal at that time, which none of the rest of us knew. But I just go back to some of the things that he has talked about very openly, and a lot of it comes to pass. A lot of it, has absolutely happened. I think he comes off as a very stand up guy, very shrewd businessman, but like kind of one of those guys that is just like very, I think the right word, and it's his word, is transparent. I just think that's the way he's chosen to operate. Is he taking a shot at the way the Big Ten and the SEC operated by the USC and UCLA departures of the Oklahoma and Texas? I don't know if he's doing that. I think he was in a position to also be a little more upfront, transparent, and all that, because everybody kind of knew. Well, yeah. I mean, obviously,
we were already naked. We had nothing.
Yes. I also think he gives you a little look at his playbook, in that he wasn't saying all of these things, but the Dennis Dodds, the people like that were certainly saying plenty for him, and whoever else he was talking to through quote unquote sources. So, but I think it's and he can call George Kliavkoff knowing that, hey, look, we wanted these 4 schools. You kind of knew we wanted these 4 schools, but we maybe weren't even going to get them had Oregon and Washington not gone to the Big Ten. And that's domino. Once it fell, the house of cards came tumbling down. And it's just wild to me. I know that people are kind of got they got the tired head over the realignment and everything, but it's fascinating to me that, Phoenix, the state of Arizona, is Big 12 country. I mean, the whole state of Utah is Big 12 country. The state of Colorado is largely Big 12 country. I mean, just seemingly overnight, just boom, like here you go. And
Disney World is Big 12 country. Keep going.
Yeah, that's right. Orlando. Yes. So it's just it's bizarre how quickly this, because we've been talking about it for so long, wondering what would happen, and he kind of laid out the breadcrumbs for it. But you're getting a little look kind of behind the curtain here with him kind of talking about it finally publicly. And hey, man, he's going to be in Lubbock next week.
That's right. At the kickoff luncheon, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you could probably get in and have a listen to him yourself if you have a ticket or plan on getting a ticket. But that should be a lot of fun. I was excited to see that actually announced. Kind of surprised me that Brett Yormark will be a part of our kickoff luncheon. So that's just around the corner. And some of what you're saying certainly is true as far as, look, I'm sure he's a great guy, very transparent. He's very collegial. He used that word, which was funny. But he's in a convenient position to operate the way that he did. How else would you operate? Like, you keep your cards close to your vest whenever your vest has already been blown to pieces by a scatter gun? No. We had already been stripped bare as a league. And I think anyone's paying attention knew what the context was in the Pac-12, knew what their future or lack thereof was going to be, and also knew because of that, it obviously made sense that the Big 12 could be in a position to gather up some of these middle tiers that are not blue bloods or the biggest brands, but quality brands, and bring them to your league, which has got a lot of what I just described, obviously now on the heels of Texas and Oklahoma leaving. And, the thought of the semantics and just some of these things were exhausting to me, Chris, because the thought of like, well, if Oregon and Washington did stay, then none of this would have happened. And it's like, dude, they were never, even if they stayed, they were gone next year or in 2 years.
Yeah, it was borrowed time.
Absolutely. It was never going to happen. So I think some of like the way that he was able to operate and communicate was somewhat a result of the positioning his league was in, which kind of leaves you unfettered when you've been stripped bare. I mean, what games do you really need to play as far as like being coy about this or that? And I think much like, well, media deals or whatever, you're talking about him calling some shots. When someone is making a comment so publicly, especially the freaking commissioner, I mean, sometimes it's just a reporter like saying this stuff or is being fed this stuff. But when we get to that point, Chris, you would like to think that agreements are already well down the road, or like you said, handshake deals have already happened. I mean, that's part of the Pac-12 confusion. We kept hearing, well, it's imminent. It's very soon. It's sooner rather than later. It's within a couple of weeks. And you're thinking, well, they wouldn't say that if it wasn't already, almost literally done. Or otherwise, that would be a big mistake. Whoops. I guess they made the mistake because it wasn't actually done. So let us know what you're making of those comments from Brett Yormark in the YouTube comments. Would love to hear your take on his perspective. As for league business, Chris, let's get to that. First, today's episode brought to you by Nutrafol. Are you one of those guys that thinks losing your hair is inevitable? Maybe that's because 80% of men will experience thinning hair in their lifetime. It is normal, but it doesn't have to be your destiny. And right now, you can get ahead of the thinning and take control of your hair's future with Nutrafol's science-backed hair growth supplement, drug-free and with patented technology that always gives you consistent, reliable results without compromising your health or sexual stamina. And you're going to need plenty of energy because your dance card is going to stay full with a revitalized coif. So head on over right now to Nutrafol.com/men. That's Nutrafol.com/men. And right now, for a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our audience $10 off your first month's subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com/men and enter the promo code LOCKEDONCollege. And again, $10 off your first month's subscription and free shipping right now at Nutrafol.com/men and with the promo code LOCKEDONCollege. As for league business, Chris, let's get to that because there were some other things that were really interesting to digest as far as the future of the conference. In part, Brett Yormark said, right now, we're done. Right now, we're done. He goes on to say, we had a vision, we had a strategy, and effectively we've been able to execute it. Initially, I wasn't sure if we go to 14 or 16. I think 16 was kind of a dream scenario, candidly. So from our perspective, our focus now is to integrate the 4 incoming schools as quickly as we can, get them comfortable. We feel really good about our future and what our membership composition looks like when you look at it in terms of where we were and where we are and where we are going. And then he adds also, as it relates to kind of the outside of the box candidates, when we talk about UConn, Gonzaga, some things like that. He says in reference to Gonzaga and UConn, quote, those conversations are no longer. Unfortunately, things didn't work out only because the dream scenario unfolded for us, that being the 4-corner edition. So done right now is the key phrase there. And Gonzaga, UConn, Chris, apparently now on the back burner. What do you make of that?
That doesn't bother me even in the slightest, that you're no longer talking to UConn or Gonzaga. I think that this was always in some ways, these were options, B, C, D, E, and F kind of thing. Like, okay, if we can't get what we want, he's told you that the folks that run this league are in charge of it, which that he reports to, does Brett Yormark, had an appetite for expansion. I think they were trying to grow the brand, grow the footprint, whatever you want to get into there. But I think that realistically, these schools being discussed here were never going to leapfrog in front of any current Power 5 school.
Yeah.
Specifically the ones in close proximity, like the 4-corner Pac-12 schools. I think it's interesting that he basically says, yes, I was talking to them, and I think a lot of them, but we're not talking anymore because we got done what we wanted to get done. I will maintain, though, the being done for now is accurate until anything happens with the ACC. Look, I don't envision, obviously, if you're not talking to UConn or Gonzaga anymore, I don't think there's any sort of interest on your part into the Oregon State, Washington State, or the Bay Area schools. I think that is just not anything that does anything for you. You're not interested, and in some cases, they may not necessarily be interested. However, I think if anything does happen with the ACC, if it were to make sense, I could envision a scenario to where you would try to scoop up a pair or, quartet, depending on how big everybody's going here. But I think about it. This league has been 12 teams at the most. It's been 10 for years. This league year, you're going to operate at 14, which is the biggest it's ever been, the Big 12. And then obviously next year it's 16. There's a lot to sort through and to just get the acclimation period. So I could see where everybody's wanting to throw up a timeout and just be like, hey man, we're just trying to get our arms around this thing first. Yeah. I mean, we got to figure out what we want to call this thing, how we want to schedule it. And then Brett Yormark's already, like, his wheels are spinning, like, now how do I leverage it into more revenue?
Right.
So I have no problem that they've thrown up the, hey, man, we're good right now. Because, I mean, nobody out there makes sense. The only possibilities now, and I don't even know if you could pick it, like who, I mean, obviously Florida State and Clemson, okay, but I don't know if that is realistic. But if the ACC were to break apart a bit, I really don't know what their quote-unquote dream realistic scenario would be there. To put some schools closer to UCF, to put some schools closer to Cincinnati and West Virginia, and maybe have more of an East Coast presence. So we could get into semantics on you know, what schools make sense. But that's the next step, if there is a step, for the Big 12, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's why also I think the same talking point remains intact regarding UConn and Gonzaga, which is you can't turn there until you've exhausted every Power 5 option. And right now, as tiny as that window may seem, there are still Power 5 options as it relates to the ACC because they're on unsteady ground. And until that changes or solidifies or totally breaks apart, that's still going to be lingering in the air. It may be a year, maybe 2 years, I don't know. But, yeah, I think that still remains the same as far as looking at Huskies or Bulldogs. I say a basketball-only inclusion. You did capture what you wanted to capture as far as West Coast Power 5 options or the Pac-12 Power 5 options, but there are still some out there, and I don't think it's fool's gold to maybe consider them candidates or to wait around to see what happens with them. So I'm in agreement with you. I don't think you have missed anything by this point in time. You've actually connected with just about everything you wanted to connect with, I think. You know, if there's a situation you find yourself in where it's kind of a mad scramble, which is sort of what it felt like, you know, it's uncomfortable for everybody, but I got to say the Big 12 emerged out of that scramble either as strong or stronger, obviously, than they were the day that Texas and Oklahoma announced their departure. And I'm saying without the Sooners and Longhorns, whenever all of a sudden you were just without Longhorns and Sooners, but you had added UCF, BYU, Houston, yada, yada, you are now a stronger league. And I get Arizona football sucks. I get Arizona State has fallen off of the relevancy map, and their leadership is throwing a tantrum. Suck it 2 times, Crow and Anderson. And I get that Colorado has not been relevant like in my adult lifetime in almost any way, shape, or form. I get all those things. But these are still brands when as compared to, say, Group of 5 options or the previous 4 options that are superior any way you slice it. So they're not dilutive. They are additive. And I think at the end of the day, you've got to be glad if you're a Big 12 fan that you were able to kind of scramble around and gather up what you could gather. I mean, I'm thinking about like it's like Chris Tucker being roundhoused by 4 different Asians and having to ask, which one of y'all kicked me? Because it was a little bit of a mad dash for a while, right? But maybe a chance to breathe for just a moment. But it is not over. It is not over. I think that's the rock bottom guarantee that I'll give you today. This certainly is not a closed conversation. Maybe paused just for a moment in time.
Yeah, Chris Tucker, man. He's been a mystery for many, many years. After Friday, you know, and you ain't got no job. You ain't got nothing to do today. Yeah, so
not yet. It's only Wednesday. It's only Wednesday. We still got a couple of days. And this one is for Mandela. We're back on the other side talking freaks. We got a trio of Red Raiders who popped up on this freaks list within college football. And we've also got some of the opposition to discuss that you're going to see right out of the gates who have got a couple of these guys on the list. We'll explain next on Locked On Texas Tech. Thanks for making Locked On Texas Tech a part of your day, whenever, wherever, however you're making that happen. We love you for it. Subscribe on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts so you never miss an episode. Wrapping up this here Fandango with Red Raider football conversation, Chris, and in a freaky kind of way. Honey, dim the lights. We got a freak squad to discuss here. This is from, I believe, The Athletic, correct?
Yeah, and I feel like we should be playing like that song back in the mid '80s from Whodini. The freaks come out at night.
Whodini.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's
I don't even like Whodini.
Yeah, this is from The Athletic. This is Bruce Feldman, that has written this list. And he's done it for a variety of different outlets. He just happens to be working for The Athletic now, but this is ESPN, CBS, Yahoo, whoever, all the different outlets he's written for over the years. And it's a list, Calvin, it's not necessarily the best football players. Okay.
Right.
It's not like the draft hot board or whatever. This is about guys in college football that stick out from the norm because they are either really strong, really fast, have crazy measurables, and sometimes we're combining these things. And it's easier to track now because you have weight room numbers, you have GPS numbers that they track with these monitors that all these coaching staffs across the country are using, and all those things. But it's been a minute. I mean, I think Tyree Wilson was on this list probably last year. I don't know for sure. I think he was, but it's probably been a minute since the Red Raiders had 3 people on this list, if ever, because he used to have a fairly small list. This list is 101 players, and you've got 3 Red Raiders listed. And
on which side of the ball, Chris?
Yeah, that's also noticeable. I think I think so. Let's get into this a little bit. Right at 20, I think number 29 on the overall list is a guy that I've talked a lot about him, and I think a lot of him. I think he's got the NFL in his future. He's going to have a chance. And it's Tyler Owens, and he's kind of somewhat of an unknown to the fan base still because they've only seen glimpses. But this is a University of Texas transfer. The first time I saw Tyler Owens, I was like, well, he looks like a typical Texas recruit. He checks the measurables box. He's just over 6'2", about 205, 210 pounds. All the pedigree you would want, but wanted another opportunity to try to get to play and play more. But I think what's fascinating here is they tell you how good he was in the brief glimpses that he played last year, but also he's been clocked at 23 miles an hour, okay, by the GPS, which would be the fastest, I think, on Texas Tech's team, I think. I don't think anybody's clocked anywhere near that. I think maybe 21, 22, somewhere around there, but 23 miles an hour is what the GPS has clocked him at. And I think he's gotten much stronger. He's got a big-time vertical jump. And I'm telling you, he's somebody that if he stays healthy and he's productive, the NFL somebody's going to call his name next year. I don't see any other way around that. And I know that safeties are kind of one of those positions, kind of like running backs per se, where it's kind of devalued in some ways. But I think he's got a chance to be a really, really good one for you. But it's not necessarily a surprise to me that he's so high on this list.
Man, I'm excited to finally see him hopefully break out and remain there in the limelight because he's had some opportunity but hadn't quite been able to put it together to be there consistently, and hopefully 2023 is that year. A little further down, number 35, also a guy that you have mentioned on this show, Miles Cole, the heir apparent on the edge, could be at least, filling some big shoes, but he's got some big feet also to fill those shoes with. So looking forward to seeing this guy in action, man, because physically he's got it all.
Yeah, and that's, 86-inch wingspan. I think he's on this list because, because of his measurables. I think, they've clocked him. It is what they talk about here at a little over 20 miles an hour on the GPS. So he's got a bit of a motor. The thing about Miles Cole is that, it really – his career has largely been based on these measurables and potential to this point. He's out of time and he's got to show it. And I think what's fascinating about Miles is he is one of the quieter guys you're ever going to be around. I had a lengthy conversation with him a couple of weeks ago, and after you kind of break the ice a bit, you realize this is a dude that really, he wants to get his stuff done. He wants to work really hard at it. And then he wants to just go home and chill and not necessarily be around many people. He just wants to kind of go watch. He's big into science fiction and the Marvel movies and stuff like that. He enjoys that. He's not out at the club. He has no desire to be out, and about, and kind of, if he ever gets his arm twisted and agrees to go do that stuff, he's going to be out for and then he's going to just give you the old Irish goodbye and not really tell anybody goodbye. He's just going to disappear, as hard as it is for him to disappear. But
Right.
this is a no-brainer on a list like this because of his freakish measurables. But the problem is he just has 12 tackles and then 2 tackles for a loss last year. So if he wants to end up being a, Whodini playing his music and the Freaks come out at night and be on the Freaks list at the next level, needs a very productive year. But he's very high on this list because there's just not many dudes that have an 86-inch wingspan and are, 6'6", 6'7", 285 that runs like he can. They just don't exist.
No kidding. Let's get to the final Red Raider, and then before we're out of here, we'll mention some of those on the schedule that we will see on opposing sidelines. Number 63 on the list, our boy Jalen Hutchings. DT, light on his feet, says Tim DeRuyter, and freakish, according to Bruce Feldman.
I think Jalen, because he's on this list because of how strong he is. Now, this is a 6 foot, 300-pound, just grown man that is very light on his feet, as you said. And I think Tim DeRuyter even makes the comment, and they let him carry the ball a few times last year. That was kind of the deal on one of those coaches shows. It's like Tony Bradford and Jalen Hutchings are up there, and they haven't decided if they're coming back yet. And and it's like Coach McGuire's sitting over there, Debbie McGuire's sitting over there, and Jalen's like, "You let me carry the ball, I'll come back." And Joey's like, "Deal."
Yeah, no kidding.
And I think he got 2 carries actually. And so I'm like on the sideline watching this play out, and he's like, "All right, here we go, right?" And I don't know if anybody was going to hold anybody to that.
That's a binding verbal contract. Whatever said is on the coach's show, Chris. That's printed in stone.
Absolutely. But I think when you see a 6 foot, 300-pound guy that the defensive coordinator is going, dude, he could be like a fullback at the next level in short yardage situations or goal line situations. He could be William Perry or whatever. But that's a credit to Jalen and just how athletic he is, which is why he's here, But he benches 500, he squats 700. I mean, these are bend the bar type weights here, folks. 18 miles an hour on the GPS. And again, he's never a guy that you're going to ask to run long distances because he's playing in a phone booth typically and dealing with double teams and all that. But it just speaks to the athleticism, which is what this list is based on.
This probably becomes a little bit of a transfer portal scouting sheet for those who want to print a copy and follow these guys through the years, see what they do, what they don't do, and then maybe take a chance on the other side just because of those measurables if, say, they're in need of a new start. And by the way, I learned in high school riding around one time at lunch in my homeboy Teef's conversion van. It had a Super Nintendo and track lighting, yes, if you're wondering. We had a little gamble once upon a time, like what's the fastest we could jump out of this thing and be fine? And we got about 25 miles an hour. If you don't think 23 or 24 miles per hour is moving, jump out of a conversion van today, and you're going to find out there's some speed behind that. I know it doesn't sound all that wild, but I can tell you firsthand there's some speed behind it. So those boys moving 23, 24, or even that 300-pounder, Jalen Hutchings at a solid 18 miles per hour. That's booking it now. That's booking it. All right, Chris, appreciate all the time and insight. As always, it's always good to be joined by our friends in the audience. How many of us have them? Friends, those we can depend on. Friends. And I hope they'll join us again tomorrow, including you, my man.
Absolutely. I'm laughing at the song there. You're taking it back, man. I love it. We kick it back to the old hip hop era. We'll be good. We will talk mañana, and looking forward to it. Keep hope alive, everybody, and we'll do it again soon.
That's right. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you got this podcast so you never miss an episode. For Chris, I'm Casey. We'll see you for the next round on Locked On Texas Tech.